In this video, we will explore the main features of the JetClient plugin for JetBrains IDE. First, let's create a draft request and send it to the server. Press Alt-Shift-D to create a new draft request. Drafts are automatically placed in the Drafts folder. If necessary, they can be moved to any other folder. We can paste a curl command into the URL field, and it will be converted into a request. Press Command-Enter to send the request to the server and view the response. Any changes made to the request are saved automatically. Now let's import API requests from our Spring Boot application. Imported requests are highlighted in green because we enabled synchronization and they are not saved yet. Let's save them. Now we can see the .JetClient folder in our project. It has the same structure as our collection and contains JSON-5 files with requests and folder metadata. These files can be committed to the repository and shared with your team. Let's modify one of the requests. Now it is highlighted in blue because it has been changed. We can see the diff between the saved and the current version of the request. And we can save or revert the changes. We can navigate to the source code from the request tree or from the request editor. Also, we can open the request editor from the source code. The base URL variable is highlighted in red because it is not defined. But before defining it, let's create an environment. JetClient allows you to create multiple environment groups and select the active environment for each group. Usually you will need at least one group environment, with environments such as local, stage, dev, prod. Let's create the environment group and the local environment. Now let's define the base URL variable. Place the cursor on the base URL variable and press Alt-Enter. We can select the folder where the variable will be defined. Let's choose the Spring folder because it is the root folder for our project. We also need to select the scope of the variable. Shared variables are saved in sync files, along with the requests, and can be shared with your team. Local variables are not saved in sync files and are intended for local use only. Let's select the shared scope. Variables of the default environment are available in all environments. Let's select the local environment that we created earlier. We can see that local and shared variables are divided into two sections. The top-level property local is the ID of the environment. We'll define the base URL variable as localhost 8080. Let's activate the local environment. Now we can see that the base URL variable is resolved. Let's send the request to our local server. The response has 401 status code because we didn't provide the authorization header. Now we'll configure the authorization. We'll choose API key and provide the header name, which is authorization, and set the header value to the token variable. Instead of defining the token manually, we'll add it to the login request test. Now let's register a new user. In the request body, we can see the JSON generated from the class. We can navigate to its source code. And we can populate the JSON with random data. Let's extract the user object into a variable. After performing the request, we can see that the user has been created. Now let's add saving the token to the login request test. We'll use the same user variable in the request body. We're going to save the token to global variables. Let's send the request. And we can see that the token has been saved to the token variable. Now let's send the request to see that the authorization works. There are two ways to write tests. The first method is to write tests directly within the requests. The second method is writing tests in test suites. Let's create a simple test for a request that creates a new article. We'll extract the article object into a variable. Next, we'll add a test that verifies if the response status code is 200. Once the request is performed, you can view the test results in the response panel. To execute multiple requests along with their tests, we'll use the test runner. First select the requests and folders, then click Run from the context menu to open the test runner. In the runner, we can select the requests and determine the order in which they'll be executed. Let's run the requests. As you can see, 2 requests have been executed, and the test has successfully passed. Now let's create a test suite. Within test suites, we can also define variables, which will have a higher priority than variables defined in parent folders. We can reuse requests from our collection or create new ones. In order to reuse a request, we need its ID. To obtain the ID, simply drag the request from the request tree to the test editor. The run request function executes the request, as well as its pre-request and test scripts. So the test that we created earlier will be executed. We use the await keyword because the run request function returns a promise that resolves to the response, and we need to wait for it. Now let's test deleting an article. We need to set the article slug as a path parameter for the delete request. Let's set the slug into a variable and use it in the delete request. We use the variable set function to set temporary variable that will be available only within the test suite. Next, we'll add a test that checks if the response status is OK. But what if we want to modify the request before executing it? In this case, we can use the find_request function and modify the request object using builder functions. For instance, let's change the request body to an empty object and add a test that checks if the response status is a bad request. We use the send_request function instead of the run_request function because we don't want to execute the pre-request and test scripts. Now let's run the test suite. As you can see, the test suite has executed successfully. For more information, please visit the documentation on GitHub.